Hey, it's Kay, and this is Skittles, head of sanitation. Coronavirus enjoyed a brief stint as a distant, hypothetical threat that most people weren't that worried about. But with the help of ludicrously incompetent world leaders and an economic system that makes it next to impossible for people to adequately protect themselves from contagious illnesses, well, here we are. Skittles and I are reporting from quarantine. Let's see if we can learn anything from this mess. We're going to take a look at the ways governments and companies responded correctly and incorrectly to the pandemic. The situation is developing rapidly, so everything I'm about to say is true at time of recording, March 23rd, but could very well change within days. Here in the UK, the first confirmed case of coronavirus was found on January 31st. The first in the US was January 20th. As the next month played out, we started to get a clearer picture of just how dangerous this virus could be, and were able to make preparations with the benefit of seeing the situation develop in places like China, Korea, and Iran, who, by the way, has been prevented from appropriately dealing with the problem due to US sanctions. So the mass graves they're currently digging might be something to think about when looking at the voting record of candidates in upcoming elections. But we didn't make preparations. We didn't learn from those countries, and we basically did nothing until March rolled around. At time of recording, the UK has only just suspended football matches and closed schools after adamantly refusing because GDP would have shrunk by 3%. Really? Our government has defended that refusal to close down schools weeks after they should have, and its failure to curtail large public gatherings until very recently by suggesting the plan was not to contain the virus at all, but to let the majority of the population get it so that we could develop herd immunity by allowing 60% of the population to become infected. Although we don't know enough about this virus to be certain that amount will be adequate, especially because herd immunity is generally achieved with vaccines, which we do not have currently. But even assuming their number is right, that's 40 million people infected. With a 2% fatality rate, that is potentially 800,000 people dead. Eventually, it became politically unviable to openly tolerate that level of death just to preserve the economy. They have, far too late, begun to take some appropriate measures. And the US has its own host of problems, largely revolving around the Trump administration's response to the pandemic, which could be described as shit. Trump referred to the virus as a hoax the day before the US experienced its first death from the virus. Trump only seemed to start taking the virus seriously after the Dow began to really plummet. His admin even refused the German-made test kit that many countries are using, insisting America will develop their own. This massively slowed down their response time to the virus, and it was reported on March 12th that only 11,000 coronavirus tests had been conducted in the US total. At the same time, South Korea was conducting 10,000 tests a day. The Republicans went on to block a bill that would have guaranteed workers 14 days of paid sick leave so they could self-isolate and not, come into work with the virus, infecting their coworkers and customers. Many people cannot afford to take that much time off work, and many people would not be permitted to by their employers even if they could afford it. Fortunately, for many workers in countries like the UK, it is an option to take some paid sick leave in order to prevent yourself further spreading the virus. If you're a full-time employee, that is. If you're one of the millions of people working in the gig economy, you probably don't get paid sick leave. So the people driving you around, delivering your food, well, they have to come into work, even if they're showing symptoms or they don't make rent. The Dems eventually compromised that sick leave bill into a worthless husk that exempts large and small businesses from the policy, meaning only medium-sized businesses are affected, helping only about 20% of workers. Our society is structured in such a way that many people cannot afford to take the necessary precautions to avoid spreading this virus. And our makeshift attempts at plastering over that fact with these lukewarm measures, they just aren't good enough. A fact that's made clearer as the death toll continues to rise. The market is proving that it can't handle a crisis like this. The business ontology is a fucking failure, and the proof is all around us. Go have a look at the shelves in your local grocery store. Some companies have put in place temporary policies to reduce the spread of COVID-19, such as giving people paid sick leave to self-isolate and allowing people to work from home. By the time the World Health Organization had elevated COVID-19 to an official pandemic, many of these accommodations were only just being put into place, or were only being discussed at that point. Needless to say, this was way too little, way too late. In the UK, our government is even instating a policy to pay 80% of workers' wages if they're unable to work because of the coronavirus. Once again, it doesn't look like gig economy workers will be considered. Curiously, these accommodations are also something people have been fighting for in their workplaces for years, especially disabled people, many of whom require leave for medical reasons, and for many disabled people, being able or unable to work can hinge on whether they'd be permitted to work from home. If you're, say, a bartender or a janitor, of course you need to be on site to do your job, but there is a huge array of office jobs that could be easily done from home. And we're seeing before our very eyes as companies like Google permit and even encourage people to work from home for the duration of this pandemic. If you know somebody who's worked an office job that could have easily been done from home, ask them what their boss would have done if they'd requested to do so. Odds are they'd have been laughed out of their office. We've been told for ages that paid leave was just too much pressure for businesses. They just wouldn't be able to afford it. Please don't ask how businesses in all of these countries afford it. We've been told it's impossible to do so many jobs from home. Universities can't do remote classes online. Your physical attendance is required. So many things workers and students, especially those with disabilities, have been begging for, fighting for, and suddenly, here they are. If you're an American right now, you're in the midst of a pandemic that has been massively exacerbated by the incompetent response of your government, huge swaths of the population being unable to see a doctor, and sick people not being able to take time off work, being forced to turn up and possibly handle your food. All while there's a candidate running in the Democratic primary who wants Medicare for all, who wants to expand workers' rights, and you're being told on every channel, from every journalist, no, that's impossible. It can never happen. Give up. But when shit hits the fan, what happens? Sick days suddenly appear out of thin air. You're able to work from home. Hell, even public sanitation suddenly finds its way into the budget. It sort of seems like these necessary quality of life improvements aren't so impossible after all. It's not about what's possible. It's about what there is a will to do, and clearly, current conditions have enabled people in power to discover that will. They even opened up hundreds of hotel rooms to homeless people in London. Turns out we can just give people somewhere to sleep? Crazy, right? But it's nowhere near enough. There are still vulnerable people living on the street. There are still people forced to go into work or end up in that position too. While coronavirus testing is free in the US, treatment isn't, with at least one person reporting a bill over $30,000. In the UK, they aren't testing any but the most severe cases. Uninsured Americans are facing the choice of bankruptcy or death, or at the very least, of massively spreading this virus around vulnerable people who it will kill. The fact that the profits of CEOs and shareholders were always the first concern resulted in our governments being weeks behind the curve during a pandemic in which every day counts. And only when those things got completely out of control did they start to make concessions to stop mass death on a horrific scale. I'm gonna link some resources in the description for mutual aid groups in Canada, the US, and the UK, and some resources around organizing unions and strikes. I would encourage you to get involved with an already active union and tenants union near you who will have experienced organizers who can guide you through the coming months. Things like rent strikes don't come out of thin air. They take work, and you need to learn how to do it right. Because this pandemic will end, and the day will come that your employer, your school, your insurance company, your landlord, your government, they all try to take back any accommodations they've given us. The day will come that they will expect us to accept that the possible is impossible again. And it won't just be a return to normalcy. There is no normalcy anymore. People are realizing this all over the globe. There are businesses that will not reopen when this is over. Unemployment is projected to hit 30%. Meanwhile, air quality is improving in cities. The way we've been living just isn't sustainable. We don't need to drive every day to a useless job that produces nothing that anyone even needs just to survive. We don't have to live like this. And the people who profit most from the way things work aren't just gonna politely step off the stage for this crisis or the next, and there will be a next. These people don't give out gifts. They will expect you and me, the working class, the poor, to foot the bill for every one of these concessions and for the bailouts going on right now to maintain the illusion that our economies are doing anything but tanking. The day will come that they expect us to pay for all of it, with austerity so brutal, it's gonna make 2008 look like a fucking joke. And that day may come far sooner than is sensible as Trump openly weighs up pushing people back into work. If you want the world to get any better, if you want to make sure we learn anything from this crisis, we need to work together. Because when that day comes and they try to collect, we need to say no.